What I find interesting is somebody that rejects me 2 years ago during a student election. Rejects me meaning sees the message and just
I was panicking.
in the middle of the panic. You actually were principled. You refused to back down from pressure, which I admired. I wanted you to be on the podcast because I'm not very fluent when it comes to what the youth really wants. I think I'm just a little too old to pretend to claim that I know what the youth really wants. So I thought somebody half my age should be the one telling me. 2 years later, we're sitting in GENXZ with a common friend, and you don't even remember that I invited you on the podcast. It's worse. You tell me, my dream, my goal is to be on a podcast. I'm like, you idiot. Check your inbox. And right when we were sitting there, you checked your inbox. You're like, oh my God. So then I decided to change everything. Rather than having you as a guest, have you as a host. This is not my podcast. This is yours. This is your series. And if I sit here, it'll be just to learn. So I won't be the guest or the host, really. I'll be just on the side. And I imagine this really being a way for you to tell me what the youth really wants. And maybe your guests and yourself can both express that here on the Beirut Banyan. So for those reasons and other reasons, it's an honor to introduce you, Sarah Al Asmar.
Thank you. This is a really good introduction. يعني gave me goosebumps. But just to defend myself, I was panicking, so I didn't see the DM. But what's good about it, إنه 2 years later, I replied to the DM. So هلا أنا إنه دفعت عن حالي.
2 years later, where you just graduated from LAU.
Yes.
Mabruk.
Merci.
You studied political science, which I think is an important subject given your, in a way, your passion. I don't think necessarily people that study political science end up in politics necessarily. They can end up literally in the university writing about the subject. But I think yours is kind of a bit of both. You like researching the subject, but I think of you as a student activist. Otherwise, you wouldn't have run in student politics. So I want to ask you up front the kind of topics that interest you the most. I know we sketched them out a bit earlier, just in terms of impunity, maybe even things like legalization of cannabis. But when it comes to your primary interests in Lebanese politics, as someone who just turned 21, what drives you in this world? What do you think are the main concerns, at least to you in your age group today?
I think for the people who know me, I'm really passionate about finding justice for August 4th. I think like this case really speaks to me, and I even did my thesis about it. So what drives me right now, like what I'm passionate about, is August 4th, and I really want to find justice for the Beirut blast. And what also I'm really passionate about, not passionate about political impunity, but I'm passionate about putting an end to political impunity and political violence, because a lot of people died from political violence. So I think we should take the step into putting an end to this.
I'll say two things. The backdrop to you is in a way where the story of political violence begins. That's the first day of the Civil War. So that's a Nahar newspaper from April 14, 1975. And I think it's quite eloquent and tragic that someone who's 21 is writing about the same subject that predates both of us.
That's true.
But I am closer to that date than you are. And this is where I want you to say whatever sounds right. I mean, you did a thesis about the port blast that dramatically impacted your generation. It impacted my generation too, and impacted all of us. Our generation is aging. My parents' generation, they're fading.
Mm-hmm.
Your generation will inherit something later. Do you think, in a way, you will have the tools one day? Do you hold some hope in that?
I think your generation and my parents' generation and our grandparents' generation lived in the Civil War. So I think they are very much affected by the factors that led to the Civil War. So I know sectarianism, for example. I think this is a huge. So they were not able to live with the fact, we can't coexist. And I think right now our generation is able to live with the fact that we actually can coexist. أنا ما في شرقية غربية. هلا okay, some people in our generation still have this mindset. It's because of their parents. But I think the main factor to find a bit of hope is to be able to sit with each other. أنا أكون قاعدة مع someone who has a different perspective in politics, بس نكون قادرين to find a middle ground. لأن بالنهاية I think the only problem in Lebanon is that all these politicians فاتوا على البرلمان and they didn't sit and talk together, while us, our generation, is able to, for example, in university, we are able somehow to sit with each other and find common ground. I mean, it's a bit impossible right now, but I think our generation has the tools to be able to do better than your or my parents' generation.
And you said the university. Is that where this energy comes from? Your involvement, at least, let's say, in, well, two things, really. Being a student in political science, but also being a student activist and running for student elections. Is that where this momentum comes from?
I think, my passion for politics started back in 2019.
Oh.
I was an exchange student in the US. And when I grew up, all my parents, all my family knew, I'm going to be an oncologist. I wanted to do med school.
Oh.
But and even when I was in the US, my host family, they were all doctors. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go to the hospital and find out about medicine. And I was so passionate about biology and stuff. But then I was invited to the Capitol Hill. I was invited to represent Lebanon at the Senate. So representing Lebanon and talking about Lebanon and talking about my identity and my roots, and even being Lebanese in the US, trying to break the stigma about us being terrorists or the stereotypes. When I was in the Capitol Hill, I was like, I think this is where I want to be. So I was like, I think this is my future. So I completely changed my everything. I was like, I'm going to do political science.
So sorry, you were studying medicine, and then that feeling October 17 abroad drove you into politics?
I wasn't studying medicine. I was still in high school.
Oh, this is in high school.
I was still in high school. Yeah. I was doing my junior year in high school.
Okay.
But I was invited to represent Lebanon in the Senate. So I think I did it so well. So I was like, this is it. I want to become the ambassador of Lebanon. So how do I start? I start by doing political science. So this is how it started. And then I went to university, and obviously after in October 17 and stuff, I was more involved in politics. I was going down on the streets, and I started working with some digital platforms on Instagram that are concerned with politics. And then in university, I felt I had a passion in me, I needed to represent the opposition. So I ran for student council in 2021.
So this really begins as somebody detached from Lebanon in Arizona.
Yeah.
Which is in itself, in a way, it's a detached part of America too. But that you find yourself in Capitol Hill, representing Lebanon.
Yeah.
And sorry, this is in the Senate?
Yeah, I met with the senators of Arizona, and I represented Lebanon.
Oh, like the state Senate.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. And then you went to Capitol Hill.
So I was invited to Washington, D.C.
Right.
So in the Capitol Hill, I met with the House reps and the senators.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So it was the fact that I was able to talk about my country with such passion. And I remember the House rep. She was like, wow, you talk about Lebanon with such passion. You should do something about it. And then I thought about it, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to do medicine. I'm going to do politics. So this is how it started. I actually never said this out loud. So this is something new.
No, but it's nice to know that it's both fresh and purpose-driven. And you said even you have a goal in mind, which is to be a diplomat.
Yeah.
So that's kind of nice that you're able to feel this early on in academic and then professional career. So you started at AU in a political science degree. 4 years later, you're done. And
3 years.
3 years. Wow. You finished in 3 years?
Yes.
Wow, good for you. Took me 5 years to finish my bachelor's. But I did 2 degrees.
It's okay.
It's okay? It's like 4.5 years. You wrote your thesis on the port blast, and you mentioned it up front that that's something you want to focus in on this podcast. That's probably the hardest subject to discuss. But can you go back to the other subjects that are of interest? We mentioned cannabis as well, legalization of cannabis. But what are the other subjects that kind of, they may not be the driving force for your career, but they're still of interest to you?
For me, for the people who know me, I'm very passionate about mental health and suicide prevention. So what I'm really passionate about is to talk about mental health. I think it's very important. Like one of my passions and one of my goals in life is to try and motivate people around me to take care of their mental health and to take their mental health seriously. Because for me, I suffered from it, and I saw people in my life. I lost people in my life who suffered from mental health and suicide prevention. Like suicide prevention is so important, and I think like this is like other than politics. Like spreading mental health awareness is something big for me.
So it sounds more personal.
Yeah, it is like it stems from a personal experience, and I think it is my duty to spread mental health awareness in Lebanon and hopefully.
So in a way, we've got.
Hello.
When you have a cat. I'm a very misbehaving cat today. I'll say, by the way, you're very gifted. And I could feel this when I met you. I think this is the second time I meet you in person, but we've spoken, or maybe we've messaged each other on social media, or I think it's the second time I see you in real life. I could feel it the first time, the way you showed up, the way you sat down, the way you started talking about your day. I could feel like you're so comfortable. And you're in your element. It's quite nice to see someone able to do this without any hesitation.
Merci.
I really mean that. I could feel it. And I can also hear your voice. I'm like, this is an interesting voice to have in the ecosystem.
Thank you.
Bold and...
and deep.
Deep,
and monotone.
No, you're not monotone. No. You don't put people to sleep. That's, I think, maybe something.
I would like to think, no, I don't put people to sleep.
No, I think, if anything, I'm listening. What are the other subjects that you can think of that would be of interest? Those are 3.
We talked about prisons. One thing about me is, like, even growing up, I was always, like, not passionate, but I want to help the prisoners of Lebanon, like the prisoners in Rumia. They live, no one talks about it, but the prisoners in Lebanon, they live like very bad living conditions, and no one focuses on this, and I think this is really important.
Yeah.
Sijin Rumia is a very bad place to live, and one of my friends actually, like, her passion is to, like, she's doing psychology, and her passion is to like help the prisoners, and I think we should focus on this in our podcast. And no one talks about the prisoners.
Are there other subjects that you can sort of sense from now that'll come up? Do you have any other...
شو كمان نحطها؟ حطيت عن وائل عراقجي. Sports.
Okay.
I talked about, we're going to talk about sports, basketball. I think, basketball in Lebanon is, is really important, because I think, it's a way to showcase our talent and showcase Lebanon abroad. And I think بيرفعونا راسنا. So I would really like to talk with وائل عراقجي.
That's at least 5 or 6 subjects right there. So we've got at least 5 to 6 episodes, if not more.
Gender equality. I mean, I think, fortunately, there's enough topics to go through in a mini-series that is youth-oriented. I think all of the regular subjects that we discuss all the time, there's a youth angle that has not been fully explored, and that's why it's great for me to sit back in this mini-series. This is really about you and what you want and what your generation wants. I am an observer. But sitting in this chair, there will be other guests coming. I'll be behind the camera, I'll be fixing the microphones, and I will sit down when necessary. And whenever there's a moment you want me to hear something you're saying, maybe something I should learn from your generation, you just bring me in. I'll be there. Inta, you should be there all the time.
I don't think so. I think there's a moment where it's healthy to step back a little bit and let a talented host fill in.
Thank you. Merci.
Sarah Al Asmar. Beginning June, we'll have the first episode. The exact date hasn't been determined. we have an idea of who the first guest will be, but we won't mention it right now.
I think the people who know me are gonna guess.
Fortunately, I think the guy, I should have said the guy or girl.
The guy or the girl?
The guy or the girl is well aware that we both want him to be here. So hopefully it's him or her. And I look forward to seeing where this goes. Thank you, Sarah.
Merci. خلاص؟
خلاص.
حلو.
حلو.
نحضر ولا نشوف.
يلا.